Hello, and welcome to our weekly dialogue with Helga Zepp-LaRouche. She's the founder of the Schiller Institute and the initiator of the International Peace Coalition, which has Zoom calls every single Friday, including this Friday. Today is November 26th, 2025. I'm Harley Schlanger. I'll be your host. You can email questions and comments to Helga via the questions@schillerinstitute.org or post them on the chat page. And Helga, there's a lot going on with these talks of ending the war in Ukraine. The situation in Gaza continues to be intolerable. The first question is on the combination of the so-called Trump peace treaty for Gaza that's being undermined by Israeli attacks. And the question is, what will happen if there's a peace agreement on Ukraine? There's a lot of talk about what can be expected from the negotiations underway between the US and Russia over ending the Ukraine proxy war. So the questioners are asking for your thoughts on how serious this initiative is. And is there anything Trump and Putin can do to keep the E3 countries from collaborating with neocons in the United States to sabotage any effort of cooperation between Russia and the United States?
Well, I think that the freak out level in Europe is a good indicator that, despite a lot of confusing reports about, the 28-point paper by Trump and who wrote it, and is it really Trump capitulating to the Russians and so forth, I think that the realities on the battlefield are enforcing the need to come to a conclusion of this war. And this has been stated by several people, including the US Army Secretary, Driscoll is his name, who seems to be the new Ukraine appointed person from Trump. And he told the Ukrainians that the collapse is imminent and that they better get adjusted to deal with that fact. Then there are also reports that, according to Ushakov, that Witkoff is expected next week to be in Moscow. So I think that the signs are all in the direction that, the remaining points which need to be clarified are minor and can be dealt with. And I think if you want to have an indicator from the negative side, then the freak out from certain Atlanticists in Europe would indicate that indeed this war is coming to an end. One very telling reaction was from Joseph Borrell, who said that after this, the European Union can no longer regard the United States as an ally. Now that's pretty heavy tobacco, as we say in Germany. And also Norbert Röttgen, also a hardcore dyed-in-the-wool Atlanticist. He is absolutely horrified about this deal. So I think, and naturally, the Europeans have really nothing anymore which they can bring in the discussion. And this was said to them quite brutally by Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, who basically said the Europeans had their chance in Minsk. They misused it, and now nobody wants to have them as a mediator in the situation anymore. And that there are now other countries like Turkey, like Belarus, and others who would be more welcomed as mediators in such a conflict. So I think, with all caution, I think there is some hope that this horrible war can come to an end. And, the British obviously want to prolong it no matter what. They have already said they will send equipment and troops there even after an agreement has been reached. Now that remains to be seen, because, I think that the military power and also economic power of those Europeans is not very strong. Sabotage naturally always can be done. But I would hope that once there is an agreement between President Trump and President Putin, where the Ukrainians somehow feel that they can agree with it, I think then, I would hope, it was careful, but nevertheless, I would hope that this would bring that conflict to an end. And, hopefully in the meantime, President Trump is not blowing up Venezuela, where the latest I read was that he said he does want to talk to President Maduro directly. So maybe this does not lead to a military intervention. However, the danger obviously is extremely big. And hopefully then, the Trump administration can put more attention to the situation in the Middle East, which is quite horrifying. And, unfortunately, the killing of Palestinians, both in Gaza and the West Bank, is only a little bit less than before the so-called peace agreement, but not substantially. So I think we are still not out of the waters. And, that's why I think we have to absolutely increase our activities. And I'm calling on all you who are watching us. This is not a moment in history to just be complacent and watch things, but we have to get every possible venue and avenue to convince people that we have to overcome geopolitics. I mean, we have reached a moment in history where the idea that you continuously weaken your opponent because you have to have an enemy to mobilize whatever you want to mobilize domestically, that kind of thinking, or that there is necessarily a zero-sum game, one wins, the other loses, all of these ideas are really obsolete and outdated and must be replaced by a new thinking of the common interest of humanity first. And once you agree on that, and also agree on a new security and development architecture, which must take into account the interest of every single country, then you can go and settle whatever problems are left, like the Peace of Westphalia, once they agreed on principles like that you always have to take into account the interest of the other. And that in today means more than ever all others, or else there is no peace. Once you agree on such principles, then you can, flesh out the details, territorial, ethnic, historic conflicts. But you have to first agree that the common interest must be that of the one humanity, and then you can approach every problem through diplomacy. And we have to return to diplomacy as a conflict resolution mechanism, because in the times of nuclear war, it should be obvious to anybody that war as a means of settling conflicts must be absolutely put aside forever.
We just got a question coming in. Someone referred to your reference to Driscoll, who's the Secretary of the Army, that he's a friend of Vance, and he's moving in now with Witkoff as the key diplomats on Ukraine, sidelining Narco Rubio, General Kellogg, and Hegseth. Is this what you're talking about as a positive sign?
I would think so, because, Norbert Röttgen, whom I just quoted, is very upset about this combination, because he says now the businessmen are dealing and not the diplomats. I mean, it's if there is a pragmatic approach whereby Witkoff, who may have been a real estate person in the past, and maybe in the future again, and he acts on the intention of President Trump, who from the beginning said he wants to normalize relations with Russia, then that's a good thing. So I think that these other people you just named, they were clearly trying to bypass the intention of Trump. And if he sidelines them, then that is very valuable.
Now, there's a question from a former judge who's now a professor in France. I was briefing her today, and she referred to Trump and Hegseth's threats to try Democratic congressmen for treason, for saying soldiers can refuse to fight on moral grounds. She also reacted to hearing the comments of the French Chief of Staff General Mandon, who said that France could defeat Russia in a war, but lacks the spirit. And the quote from him is that the French seem unwilling to lose their children or to suffer economically. And the question she asks is, how can citizens tolerate leading officials who say such things?
Well, they should not. They should kick them out. They should make an uproar. They should demand the resignation of such an incompetent general. Because, I mean, the entire discussion in Europe about rearm Europe, beefing up for the coming war with Russia, which will take place by 2029, the latest, maybe tomorrow. I mean, I can only say there are two possible ways to deal with that. Either you really demand the resignation of such people, or you do it like I saw one very funny comment by a Bavarian comedian called Monika Gruber. And she made a absolutely fantastic comedy where she said, the Russians are coming, and she then contrasted that with the absolute ridiculous woke culture in Germany, where there would be no way of Russia could coming because the repair of the bridges don't function, so they can cross the bridges and on like that. So I think that is one way of making people laugh about it. But more seriously, I think these people should be kicked out of their position. They have no right to do that, because the coming war, if it is a war, will not be a conventional war. I mean, there's no way how Russia is going to take Poland or a Baltic country or some other European country, and then there will be a conventional war. The danger of war would erupt from delivering Taurus and Tomahawk and similar weapons to Ukraine, and then strikes are being made deep into the territory of Russia. And then, one final red line too much is crossed, and then Russia would respond, maybe not with nuclear weapons in the beginning, maybe just with the Oreshnik, which is not necessarily a nuclear weapon, but it's unstoppable because it can go very fast with Mach 11, and there is no defense against it right now. And it could very well be that if these people keep doing what they're doing, that one fine day such a Oreshnik will hit a weapon firm in Germany or some other country in Europe as a signal to wake up. We also have this, this Greenie Hofreiter who said, that maybe the old people should go to the front lines first because they already had a good life. So, the implication is if somebody dies, they should die first. I mean, we should kick these people out of politics because, this is, I hate to say, this reminds me of a kind of thinking that old people are useless eaters. And, we had that already 80 years ago.
Here's a question from a regular contact in Minnesota who said, I hear often from the LaRouche movement that the City of London-linked financial circles want war. How does war serve the interests of corporate cartels other than the contractors to the arms producers and merchants? And he pointed out that General Smedley Butler once said, all wars are bankers' wars. How would you answer that question?
I think that's absolutely the case, because wars, who is dying in wars? It's always the simple people, the poor, the people who think that they have no other means to have a good profession than to go to the army. Because the times where it was a patriotic duty to defend your country, that, in a certain sense, that era is over, because the power of the modern weapon systems, especially with the arrival of nuclear, thermonuclear weapons, is such that it is insane to even contemplate war. And, right now, the only people who have profited are, on the one side, naturally, the arms production firms, those people who speculate in the stocks of those firms, but it is very much linked right now with another bubble, that of the AI. So the continuous outpouring of more weapon systems combined with the AI and Bitcoin and stablecoin bubble, that is right now the only place, where in the West real profit is being made, but it's all based on destruction of the real economy, as we can see. The whole discussion in Germany that if you invest in armament, this would help to restart the economy is just proven to be completely wrong, ludicrous. The German economy is in a free fall, and Rheinmetall and other weapon producers, when the news arrived in the media that maybe the Ukraine war could come to an end, then these stocks plunge. Now that shows you how insane it is. It is as insane like in the liberal economy, when a firm lays off 10,000 people, the stocks rise. Why? Because the so-called profitability of the firm goes up, but real economy is being destroyed. Labor jobs are being destroyed. And likewise, with the investment in the military, you are destroying actual physical assets which are lacking elsewhere. And you only have to look around in the United States or in Europe, and you see the collapsing infrastructure, the not repaired schools, the lack of cheap energy. So it is definitely a truthful word that wars only help those who are the producers of weapons and speculators and the banking sector. Absolutely.
You're listening to Helga Zepp-LaRouche, the chairwoman of the former chairwoman, but the founder of the Schiller Institute. Helga, there are some questions now from Asia. The new Japanese Prime Minister Takaichi seems to be pushing for a military buildup to confront China. And the question is, does this resurrect the idea of the Quad as a further eastward expansion of NATO? And the second part of the question is, given the murderous imperial policy, the march by Japan in Asia in the 1930s and 40s, will the victim nations of that march in Southeast Asia, such as Vietnam, Korea, and others, as well as China, accept Japan having nuclear weapons?
Well, I would tend to think not, because the ghost of Japanese militarism is not forgotten. It is not forgotten among some of the Asian countries, but especially naturally not on the side of China, who is really warning in the starkest terms against the idea, when Prime Minister Takaichi said that she could imagine that Japan would get involved if China would make a military move to unify with Taiwan. This was completely rejected by China. First of all, I don't think that they are planning to have a military unification, because they claim, since the Cairo conference correctly and since the Potsdam Declaration, it is international law that there is only one China, of which Taiwan belongs to the Chinese mainland. So it is a meddling in the internal affairs, and China therefore was very harsh, really, calling against such meddling in its internal affairs. And there was an article also just now in Foreign Affairs where the author is calling for both Germany and Japan to be nuclear armed. And he claims that this would increase the stability on the international situation. And I think it would open a can of worms. First of all, it would, the idea of both two of the Axis powers of the Second World War now acquiring nuclear weapons is a nightmare for all the neighbors, both in Asia in respect to Japan, but also, I cannot imagine that all European countries would accept that, because already the talk by Chancellor Merz that he wants to make the German army the most powerful army in Europe, it is bringing, unfortunately, back the ghosts of the Second World War and the crimes which were committed there. And, it is totally forgotten in Europe and in the United States to a very large extent. But Japan played a very, very evil role in the Second World War, which cost the Chinese more people to die than even in Russia or in the Soviet Union. And, the massacre of Nanjing is not forgotten and things like that. So it brings, it's really stupid because it brings back memories of an identity of both Germany and Japan, which, many generations since the end of the Second World War had actually quite well managed to put it as part of the past. Why evoke these spirits by going again in a militaristic policy? And naturally, one should not be surprised that, Russia, for example, is now accusing Germany that there is a revival of the Third Reich in the form of a Fourth Reich, which, one can debate and may not agree with it in exactly this way. But if you have such militarization, it poisons the atmosphere. And anybody who is sane should oppose it with all possible ways and means.
Helga, you're often interviewed by Chinese media. You've been writing essays for various publications. What's the mood in China now that Trump has spoken with Xi a couple of times? You have on the one hand this discussion of a military buildup with Japan. On the other side, you have the talk of cooperation. What do you think is the overall view in China of where the situation is headed?
Well, I think it's twofold, if you compare the style and language of Chinese officials, how they are speaking now on different topics, as compared how they only spoke a year or 2 years or whatever time ago, it is much harsher. It is much more self-assured because, China can, rest on the knowledge that they have bypassed the West in terms of science and technology. They are leaders in, according to the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, the SP, they're leading in 57 categories of 63. They also have by far the most patents. They are pouring out more scientists and engineers than any other country in the world. And their economy is solid and growing due to a correct policy of permanent injection of innovation. And if you look at their next 5-year plan for the 15th 5-year plan, it puts total emphasis on breakthrough technologies, on putting more of the basic R&D, more investment in a larger share in the R&D than any other economy on the planet. So they go for disruptive technologies. They are doing everything right if you look at it from the standpoint of physical economy. So they in a certain sense have a position of strength, but they also have not changed their harmonious outlook. They would like to have a situation where a great power relationship between the United States and China is put on a stable basis. They made that offer already to President Obama, who completely ignored it and never really responded to it. And, given the fact that Trump accepted an invitation to visit China in April, and he said that he already made a reciprocal invitation for Xi Jinping to visit the United States on a state visit later next year, I'm actually quite hopeful that, because the Chinese are really excellent diplomats, they know how to, how to create a field where, the possibility for peaceful resolutions of conflicts always remains. On the other side, they are also, they're not willing to make compromises. I think one of the most surprising but telling statements was made by Foreign Minister Yang Yi a couple of months ago when he was asked, I think it was by Kaja Kallas, the foreign minister of the EU, who basically tried to pressure him that China should not support Russia in the war against Ukraine. And Wang Yi said, look, if we are fully aware that if we don't support Russia in respect to the Ukraine war, we will be the next. So that was a very unusual, statement, but I think that reflects the thinking. So China is moving, with the absolute determination that the century of humiliation should never happen again, that the Japanese militarism will never be a threat to China again, but otherwise they are trying to have a harmonious relation. And, I think what they're doing in respect to the global south is a civilizational contribution of unparalleled dimensions, because they allow countries of the global south to leapfrog to new technologies, bypassing levels which are outdated and not necessary anymore. And that way, I think they are really helping the developing countries to overcome colonialism. And that is really not appreciated in the West. They just look at it as a competitor and, rival for raw materials and so forth. They don't understand that the aspiration of the countries of the global south is to not be raw material exporter anymore, but to develop the value chain in their own country. And they find in China a reliable, trustworthy partner, which is why many of these countries regard China as a true friend. And, we in the West would do much better if we would do likewise and earn the friendship of the global south, rather than going in there like a bulldozer and trying to assert our so-called superiority.
I have another economic question for you in a moment, but we have a little bit of humor from a regular correspondent, Devashis, who said, maybe Europe could buy enough energy from Russia and mend the German bridges before they get invaded.
Yeah, I hope so.
And he said, but seriously, Helga is 100% right. The Malthusian madness of the European leaders is off the charts. So here's the economic question for you on the LaRouche FDR policy. The LaRouche organization is initiating a campaign for nations to adopt regulatory standards to create a global Glass-Steagall. Restoring Glass-Steagall in the United States after the 2008 crash was one of Lyndon LaRouche's 4 laws. With warnings of an implosion of the AI and the tech bubble, the question from an economics teacher in Ghana was, with most people grossly ignorant about physical economy, how can they be mobilized to support Glass-Steagall?
Well, if you are an economic teacher, then that is a good place to start. I think you can, anybody can download the various legislative proposals we have made in the past, and I'm sure we will issue in these days another proposal for such a global Glass-Steagall initiative. I think the first thing is to equip yourself with the various writings we have done. Lyndon LaRouche has written a lot about it, and I'm sure that we will put out on our websites, on all the different international websites, a package so that you can download it and send it to your parliamentarian, to your mayor, to your state legislator, congressman, senator, whatever, or organize private meetings, get people involved, because this is the one, big thunder, growling over the sky, because there's a Damocles sword. You could have a collapse of the system, which could bring down the entire world system in a way much, much bigger than what was 2008. And, the option of just to repeat what was done in 2008 with quantitative easing clearly is not there any longer. And the bubble is a lot bigger. It's approximately $2 quadrillion of totally uncontrollable money if it comes to such a crash. So it would be extremely important that we resume the discussion about Glass-Steagall in every single country and get legislative bodies to think about it, because that could bring a collapse of civilization as we have never seen.
And as you pointed out, Lyndon LaRouche wrote extensively about the questions, the difference between physical economy and funny money. And people can go to the Executive Intelligence Review to see his older writings, but also the work we're going to be turning out now. I have one further question from Africa, which is someone wrote in and said, please tell me if there are plans to set up a LaRouche youth movement in African nations. I was very excited by the youth conference, and I wonder, would you include African choral music as part of your program?
I didn't understand the last. Can you repeat that?
Yes, would you include as part of your cultural program African choral music, singing especially from South Africa and other countries?
Yes, as you probably, if you watch the Paris Youth Conference, we had the national anthem of South Africa sung by our chorus, because it's such a beautiful melody and composition. My answer to your question is yes, because we believe that first of all, we are in the process of discussing with young people from different African countries to organize participation in our next youth call, which is on the 14th of December, because this will be almost a whole day, 2 panels organized with key speakers and also key speakers from the young organizations. So you should definitely get to our website, get registered and participate in that day. And we also are encouraging students and young people from all over the world, actually, not only Africa, but also emphatically Africa, to set up satellite meetings, so that you are not only listening to these panels individually, but you can organize some gathering where you organize actually larger groups of young people, because we absolutely intend to encourage such a discussion process, because I believe that we are in a situation where it is the voice of the global South which has to be heard in the North, that you are not accepting any longer any form of colonialism, imperialism, exploitation of various kinds, and that you demand a new paradigm along the lines of the Bandung spirit, the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence. And I'm absolutely certain that if there is a strong voice coming from the young people of the global South, it also will help to wake up young people in the collective West, who are still having a lot of illusions about the old system, because they really don't have a clear, or many of them have not yet a clear idea about the tectonic change going on in the world right now. And part of it, obviously, is a dialogue of civilization. And we have encouraged that since the beginning of the founding of the Schiller Institute, because it has been my conviction from the very beginning that you need to bring about, enforce the best tradition of every nation in order for the new world economic order to function. And the best culture is, how that is expressed.
Now, Helga, there's a meeting coming up on Friday, again, a Zoom call of the International Peace Coalition. These have been absolutely instrumental in organizing international forces to discuss what can be done to create a new strategic geometry. What is planned for this Friday?
Well, I already last week announced that Professor Falk would be a speaker. Then he was hindered in the last moment, but he has now confirmed that he will speak on Friday. And he participated in this big tribunal in Turkey on Gaza, so he will for sure report the result of this discussions. And naturally, since the Ukraine war is likely coming to an end. That will be absolutely a point of discussion, and hopefully we can report that the Venezuela crisis is ended through a dialogue between Trump and Maduro. However, that cloud also obviously hangs over us. So there will be very important topics. So you should absolutely make an effort to not only participate yourself, get your colleagues, your friends, your family, and bring them to this discussion, because, you know, it is a very important area of communication every single week, where, you know, if you register, you can participate in the discussion, but you will hear every single week top experts on these crisis points, and that is for sure a better source of information than the mainstream media. So please come on Friday.
Well, tomorrow is Thanksgiving, and it's usually a time where families get together. A lot of our regulars write that they're having trouble talking to their families about these global crises. I would recommend that you might want to play this video, this interview with Helga, to stir up a discussion of something other than which football team is having a bad year or a good year. So we wish you all a happy Thanksgiving and a good discussion. And Helga, will see you again on Friday.
Yes, happy Thanksgiving for all of you.